In this lesson, we're going to code the player to enable the player to react with gravity. So as we jump the player, it will actually rise a certain distance depending on the gravity force, and then it will return back to the ground. So previously we created the player character and we put a collision shape on there, which is becoming useful to collide with the ground, which I'll show you very soon. So same as what you've done before with the scripting, click on the player node, add a new script, save it in your scripts folder, and then we're going to get this. Now please do not be alarmed with this type of code. You will get used to it over a period of time. I did mention when we started coding earlier that there's some simple pieces of code and some not quite so simple pieces of code, and this being not quite complex, but it's not too bad. I'll explain each line, very important. Now take your time with this, because this is the part that everybody seems to want to be able to do, is move a particular object around a screen. If you follow these guidelines, you'll find it quite easily, no problem at all. Okay, now you'll notice, if you remember, we made the player a character body 2D because of different properties it needs. Then I've put two comments: Godot 4 player movement with animation and gravity. Now this animation is very important, because if you look at the previous tutorial we did from the Godot website, it's fantastic at actually looking at player movement and gravity and things, but it didn't include any kind of animation on this. So this takes that tutorial slightly further, and then you'll notice that gravity, which is based around the project settings. So I can show you that now before we start. So project settings, and inside the window here you have physics 2D, and then that's the default gravity scale. We're not going to adjust that at all, but that's where the program code gets the gravity scale from. You used to have to set the gravity scale yourself, but now it gets it from the system settings. So you can see here, gravity based on project settings. That's where that is from there. So if you wanted a very light flailing type effect, you can default the gravity down to a lot less than that, and things will be a lot lighter to move around. You'll notice that const is a different type of variable you've met before. It's a constant variable. In other words, nothing's going to change within the program. Nothing's going to change. It's not allowed inside this particular program, by the way. But you'll notice a difference. The constant variables are capital letters, and then we can still set a value to it, no problem at all. So we set two constants up, one for the speed of the player and the jump velocity. In other words, how much power it puts into the jump. Now on earlier levels you might have the jump's gravity being higher, and then as you reduce it, the player can't jump quite as high, so it makes the game more challenging. Okay, so it gets the gravity from the project settings to be synced with rigid body node. No, but we've already just done that. So next bit, gravity is project settings, get settings, and then it's got the settings from there, what I just showed you from the actual project settings before. Then we're going to start a loop. So func physics process. Now the difference between func process and func physics process is that the physics reacts to the gravity, which has been set here. It's far better because this is more like a physics type loop. Okay, so then we add the gravity. Now the first check, we're checking to see whether the player is on the floor before we try to jump again. if we didn't check for this, every time you press the jump key, in our case the up arrow key, the player would jump regardless of whether it be on the ground or not, which is okay for testing, but when the game's running properly with real users, you really need to make certain that it checks on the ground floor. So velocity, speed of it, dot y plus equals gravity multiplied by delta. So that is actually saying if not is on floor, in other words it's not touching the floor, it will not react to the key press. That's basically what we're looking at here. So it's a handle the jump. Now this next bit here, we're going to say if the player presses the up arrow key, in other words UI up. Now these are settings that's setting in project management. In the project settings, okay, you'll notice input map here. Now input map usually is on default, so built-in actions, I'm going to show them this time, and you'll notice there's lots of different actions here that's automatically built in from Godot. So we're going to use the up arrow key. So if we scroll down, you can see UI, all this type of thing here, and you will find UI text options there. So that's where you will find them. So you can see here we've used UI left and UI right, one single line, and it detects for both keys. Okay, so ver direction equals input. Now input is the keyboard input, or you can use the joypad, no problem at all, it's an input. Get axis, in other words which way the player is going to move. UI left and UI right, they're the keys for left and right arrow keys, or your A and S, I think it is on your keyboard. I always use the arrow key because it's a bit easy for me to reach them from there. So then we say if input is action pressed UI right, now this is where we're going to put an animation as well if they press the right key. So the right key pressed, it will make certain the player is facing to the right before moving. Then animated sprite 2D play walk. It will play the walk animation that we set up on the player. So you can see the walk animation we created earlier. That's where the walk animation gets set. So animated sprite 2D there, play walk. Then animated sprite 2D flip H, in other words we're walking as a default from left to right, so we don't need to flip the actual player at all, it's walking in the same direction. Okay, velocity.x equals direction multiplied by speed, so the speed of the actual player is directed by the x-axis and the direction is that multiplied by speed. Now if you wanted to change that, you can change the speed value here, no problems at all. Okay, now elif, and because we've got two conditions here, UI left and UI right, we've already done the UI right, but if we then click on the UI left key or the left arrow key, the animated sprite 2D play will continue to the walk, which is the same as in the right hand facing one, but this time we're going to flip around on the horizontal axis the player. So when we press the left arrow key, the player sprite will change to face left, so therefore it's walking forwards at all times. Then if we're not pressing any keys at all, the right or left key, else we're going to play the idle sprite. Now we're not going to move when we play the idle sprite, so wherever the player is currently, it will stop and play the idle sprite, because velocity.x move towards velocity x 0 speed, so there's no movement there at all. And the final part of the code is move and slide, which will actually is a really good function for moving the player around. So what I'll do, I'll bring this back to the top. I'll give you time to copy that code in there. So pause the video, put that code in for now, and then in a couple of minutes I'll actually bring it down so you can put the other code in there. Very, very careful when you're typing this in, guys. Remember what I said about computer programming and scripting. You need to be 100% accurate. 99.9 recurring accuracy will not do in computer programming. So take your time with it, fill that in, and then I'll see you in a second. Okay, now I'll move the program code down. So it was past that. So I'm going to just put it just past that comment so you can see the moving slide. I tell you what, I'll get rid of that line there so you can see it. So where the moving slide is, you can see it now. Okay, so you can see there, and we should be able to find the moving slide just there. So again, I'll give you a couple of minutes to type that in. Okay, now if we test this scene at the moment, you'll see all that happens is the player falls. So what we need to do to test this is to create a simple scene with the ground plane on it and the player to move on there. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to scene, new scene. Now it's going to be a 2D scene because we're going to create a node 2D scene of which we can drag in our assets to test the scene. So click onto that. I'm going to double click. I'm just going to call it test level. Okay. Now we don't have to do much on this because we've already got the player. So I'm going to drag the player scene. But first of all, I'm going to drag the ground scene in first, because we want to make certain that that's put on the ground scene. If I go to the 2D view, now that's the position, if you remember, where the ground was created. And I said don't move that for a very good reason, because when we put it into a test level, we can now move on to the move scene. Now we're going to move the ground scene down here, down to the bottom, and then that is now in place quite well. Remember, the blue bottom line is where the bottom of your scene is. You're going to make sure the ground is above that. Okay, next thing we need to do, we can drag the player on top of that node. Again, the player will drop into there. So I'm going to need to click onto the move scene again, go into there. I'm going to zoom in a little bit to see what this is and make sure the player's on the ground when it's walking and not fall through it. So I'm going to test this scene now. So again, we're going to save this scene. So if we go to play in the scenes folder, test level, save that. And if we run this now, by using the arrow keys, we can move our player around, and you see it idles away if you're pressing nothing. If I press the right arrow key, it faces to the right with walking animation. If I press the left key, it faces to the left with walking animation. If I press the jump key, you can see it jumps up, and if I try to double click, you can see it's not jumping twice. Jumping once inside there. Now this is quite a height it's jumping, but that depends on you, how you want to set up your level, which is no problem at all. So that's the player character done now, full of movement, animated movement, jumping movement, and we'll put together a full level very soon. So I'll see you in the next video.